Hello, and welcome back to Resident Evil Zero. We're going to be exploring this beautiful training facility a little bit further today while I cover the topic, which is actually going to be the non-canon games or the side games a little bit further, with a brief mention of Gaiden, of course, because I'm going to list them in the order that they were released. But before we do that, I want to say thank you very much for coming out and watching me play this game and listen to me ramble about trivia. I keep saying it, but I'm having a lot of fun doing this channel, and I hope that you guys have had a chance to just relax and kind of enjoy me playing around with this. There are a couple of things I want to talk about channel-wise coming up. Tomorrow, Wednesday, will be King. We're going to be looking at the final portion of this with the combined Gestalt. Friday, we will be looking at Vrumagine, who should be arriving actually the day this video comes out. So, I'm looking forward to that. And then we'll be starting a new series. I originally planned on doing Gokaiger, who I've painted up and all that kind of stuff, but I have another series of toys I want to look at for Super Sentai. I keep wanting to call him Abba Ranger. I don't believe it is. I have to look it up again. But it's like the Dino Storm series that came out in the US where Tommy Oliver got to be the Black Ranger who had a Brachiosaurus. But we'll be looking at those because I still have the stickers on those, even though they are peeling off. And I'll have to paint the toys up. But I wanted to look at them sticker-wise. And after I paint them, I might do a little comparison video and show you guys the difference between painted and stickered. Even though I'm not the greatest at painting these, there is differences. Usually I get to put a little more detail into the toy when I paint them because I can add extra colors where there's no stickers. Like, you know, there might be a silver line that continues on throughout the whole Zord and the sticker only has it on the top. Anyways. So, yes, tomorrow, King. Friday will be Vrumagine. Thursday will be, of course, another Resident Evil Zero. And I already know the topic I want to cover in that one, so we're good to go on that. And then I have a plan in place that's kind of being worked out a little bit, but once I finish the series, I will be starting Resident Evil Remake as my next trivia series because I have a lot of fun doing these, I've discovered. And so we'll be looking at Resident Evil Remake next. It's not going to be happening anytime soon. I'm not sure how much longer this has to go. I still have another 2 or 3 videos, and I haven't even finished the game. So, we'll get there. But yeah, when we do Resident Evil Remake, we'll be playing the Chris portion. So we will see the finished story of Rebecca via Chris. But I plan on doing a late night stream where I'll be playing as Jill. I don't think we'll get through the game in one sitting, but we'll try. But I have some little fun ideas for that popped up, and I'm working on it with actually Leroy, who plays with me when I have my Switch It Up Sundays. He and I are fleshing out some ideas. I'm going to have hopefully a couple of people on there chatting with me, and we'll see just how it goes. So, yeah. Now, let's get into the meat and potatoes of the trivia that I want to cover. As I said, I want to look at the side games. I already covered Gaiden quite extensively and learned a lot about it. I didn't cover the developmental stuff too much, but I was very curious about the game, so I had a lot of fun learning about it. I watched actually a couple of playthroughs on it as I was writing my script up. So, yeah, I'd love to play it at some point. I just got to figure out how. Anyways, I want to start talking with the first game that came out that's considered a side game. This game was released back in 2000. It was released on the PlayStation and through Microsoft Windows. And it was part of the Gun Survivor series, which was a series of 4 games. There were 3 Resident Evil games and 1 Dino Crisis game, which is another kind of fun series. I'd love to play the first one. The second and third games, not my cup of tea, but the first one was a lot of fun from what I recall. Anyways, at the time of its release in 2000, there were some controversies that were occurring that involved school shootings. And due to that, there was actually an issue with the US release. everywhere else this game was released, it had light gun support. In fact, I think you could get a special edition that came with a light gun. In the US, it didn't have light gun support, and there was no light gun peripheral for it either, due to the school shootings. Now, I don't want to get into the politics too much, but studies have shown that video games are not really the cause of a lot of these violent acts and all that kind of stuff, but, you know, tensions were high kind of deal, and I understand why it occurred, even if I don't really agree with it, because, you know, whatever. So, politics aside, it was very interesting because this game apparently was very difficult to play with a controller, since it wasn't meant to play that way. You could, on any system, you could, like the Japanese version, you could play with a controller on that as well, but it was meant to be played using the light gun peripheral. Anyways, this game takes place after Resident Evil 2, and you play as an amnesiac. As the story progresses, you learn his actual story and who he actually is, because at one point he believes he's the villain of the game, and it turns out he's actually an agent sent there by Leon Kennedy to investigate this island. There are, of course, thrills and chills and mysteries abound as he goes through and discovers the truth about himself and saves some children. And then, at the end of the game, of course, you escape with the children for the good ending, the island explodes, and that was the end of that game. Yeah, that it was a simple game. It had decent reviews, but it didn't do extremely well, but it did well enough to end up getting a couple of sequels down the line. The next game that actually came out that was a side game was Resident Evil Gaiden in 2001. So, like I said, talked about it last video, we're going to move on from it. In the same year, another entry in the Gun Survivor series was released, and that is Resident Evil Survivor 2 Code Veronica. This game was developed to coincide with Resident Evil Code Veronica and told the story a little bit differently. You could play as Claire Redfield or Steve Burns, and you would go through, through the game, take care of the enemies, all that kind of stuff, and at the end of the game, it was discovered that this was actually a dream that Claire was having as she escaped from Antarctica with her brother. Resident Evil Survivor 2 was actually a game that was developed in conjunction with Namco, released in 2001, as I said, and there's actually a character in this game that is not present in the original Code Veronica. Only in Code Veronica Gun Survivor will you run into Nemesis. The levels are timed. If you do not get out in time, Nemesis will begin to chase you, and he's a one-hit kill enemy. He finds you and he kills you. You have to escape within an amount of time, or Nemesis will chase you down. The following year, in 2002, Resident Evil Dead Aim was released. This game was released on the PlayStation 2. This is the third entry in the Gun Survivor series for Resident Evil. I believe the Gun Survivor entry for Dino Crisis came out before this one. This game used a third person for movement, but would switch to first person for gunplay moments. It takes place 4 years after Resident Evil 2, and you are aboard an ocean liner. It's infested by the T-Virus by a former Umbrella employee who has gone rogue and is now a bioterrorist. Well, Umbrella was kind of a bioterrorist too, but you get the idea. 2 government agents board, Bruce McGivern from the US and Fong Ling from China. And the two will go through investigating the outbreak, and they end up on an island facility, eventually destroying it and returning to the US together. Now, none of these Gun Survivor games were great. From what I recall, I played a little bit of the third one, and it was alright. It's a game. You can have fun playing it, but it definitely didn't feel like Resident Evil for me. Even though they got more action-oriented as time went on, it just... it had some great ideas, but I think it failed to capitalize on them. 2003, the Resident Evil series entered into the online multiplayer field with PlayStation 2's Resident Evil Outbreak. Now, this is the first Resident Evil game that I always wanted to play but could never manage to get a hold of. Every time I went to Blockbuster to rent it, because I'd rent games sometimes to play on my friend's PlayStation since I had Nintendo stuff and he had PlayStation stuff, it would be out. Now, I don't know if you know what Blockbuster is, since that's where I would go to rent these games, but you can ask your parents. It'll make them feel old. Trust me. And if you're one of my watchers that know what Blockbuster is, you're old. Trust me. Anyways, this game had an episodic storyline structure, and it took place during the same time as Resident Evil 2 and 3. Though this game is not considered canon, there is some discussion that it may have parts that are. As time has gone on and remakes have occurred, it might just be Easter eggs, but characters are mentioned from these games in a lot of the new games. In fact, in the Resident Evil 2 remake, one of the main characters, a policewoman, who is tasked with escaping the RPD to find a way to rescue any survivors within it by getting some mode of transportation, is mentioned in the game with the same basic plot. And so now people are wondering if some of the Resident Evil Outbreak stuff is now being kind of folded into canon, even if it's not completely so. The cop in question is Rita Phillips, just in case you guys want to look her up a little further. Now, there are 5 individual scenarios, but they are not set in chronological order, but all take place from about the initial outbreak until the Raccoon City incident, roughly. In 2004, a sequel to this game was released, called Resident Evil Outbreak File 2. Once again, it is a multiplayer online game, and since I didn't talk about it before, the structure of this game was the fact that you would be able to team up with up to, I believe, 3 other people and escape from the city in the scenarios. So it was a lot of fun from everything I've seen. You can actually now, I don't know if it's for both of them, but I know File 2, the servers have been reopened, and there are certain mods and ROMs and stuff like that in place that you can find and play this game online with friends again. So there you go. As I said, File 2 was released in 2004, and it followed the same type of episodic gameplay and takes place at the same time as the first Outbreak game. There are 4 separate endings available for this, though, which are basically good, bad, depending on which route you take in the game and who survives, of course. This one has some cool storylines in it. In fact, one of the storylines was kind of made into a comic for the Resident Evil magazine. So we'll be looking at that a little bit more when Resident Evil 2 happens on my channel eventually. Now, it would take 3 years for a new side game to come out. 2007 had Resident Evil: The Umbrella Chronicles. This game was also released in 2012 on the PlayStation 3, and it is a rail shooter game, or an on-rail game, or whatever you want to call it. It was developed by Capcom and Cavia, and it was designed as kind of a recap, as told by Wesker, as it talks about Umbrella's actions during Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil Remake, and Resident Evil Nemesis. But also has some extra material talking about Umbrella's downfall. There is an unlockable co-op mode available after completing Hunk's mission. A sequel, Darkside Chronicles, was released in 2009 and re-released in 2012 as well for the PlayStation 3. A retelling of events for Resident Evil 2 and Code Veronica, along with a little bit of a story setup as a prequel to Resident Evil 4. This game was, like its predecessor, an on-rail shooter. Next, we have a 3DS entry with 2011's Resident Evil: The Mercenaries 3D. It was put onto the Nintendo eShop the following year in 2012. This was a third-person shooter and was something of a combination of Mercenaries mode from Resident Evil 4 and 5. Something of a controversy was the fact that save data could not be erased. So anytime you would purchase this game as a used game, that means that you wouldn't be able to experience it brand new for yourself. And it was thought to be Capcom trying to curb the resale of these used games on the secondary market. Resident Evil Revelations was released on the 3DS in 2012. And guess what? Suddenly you could overwrite your saves again. Capcom said it wasn't due to the fact that they got all the backlash from the last game. It was, they just decided to go back to the way it used to be. So yeah, in 2012 this game was released on the 3DS, but then in 2013 it was released on the Wii U, the PS3, Xbox 360, and the Microsoft Windows. And then again in 2017 it was released for the PS4, Xbox One, and Switch. This game is more in line with the original Resident Evil style of gameplay, as it's more horror survival than action game, as it is very much based upon survival exploration with limited supplies. The game puts you in control of Jill Valentine as she boards a luxury cruiser in search of the missing Chris Redfield. And then later on, you actually control Chris Redfield as he tries to find Jill, who got lost trying to find him. There's intrigue and mystery abound as the truth about a destroyed city called Terra Grigia and the counterterrorism units connected to it is solved. 2012 also saw the release of Operation Raccoon City on the PS3, Xbox 360, and for Microsoft Windows. A third-person shooter entry that has you playing as one of two teams, one Umbrella and the other the U.S. Special Forces, and it covers their behind-the-scenes actions during the events of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil Nemesis. A sequel game, Revelations 2, was released on the PS3, PS4, the Vita, Xbox 360, and Xbox One, as well as Microsoft Windows in 2015, and then for the Switch in 2017. This game, again, details the ties between a counterterrorism organization and the remnants of Umbrella, specifically Alexandra Wesker, who is one of the Wesker children. This is a plot device that was brought up in Resident Evil 5 and talks about the reason why Wesker is the way he is. He's a specially trained and specially raised boy from Umbrella. He was an experiment by, I believe, Spencer, and this is one of his siblings, so to speak. This game puts you in control of Claire Redfield. This is one of the few times that you get to play as her. The only other games I know of offhand that have you playing as her as a main character is Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil Veronica. And you play as Claire Redfield as she assists Barry Burton's daughter through a trap-laden place that Alexandra Wesker has set up in order to experiment on them with this special virus that she has made that causes you to turn into a monster when you have too much fear in your system. You then switch to Barry Burton, who has to go on a mission to save his daughter because Claire Redfield manages to escape while Barry Burton's daughter does not, unfortunately. So Barry comes in and he has to save the day, rescue his daughter, and rescue a young girl who ends up being very much tied to a surprise ending for the game. This is the second title that I know of that has you in control of Barry Burton for a console. The other one being Resident Evil Gaiden. We have yet another horror shooter with the Umbrella Corps on the PS4 and for Microsoft Windows in 2016. This is a competitive multiplayer featuring zombies and is basically about a mercenary group being sent in to retrieve lost Umbrella secrets from zombie-infected areas. You can play a single-player campaign, but it is only training. The only way to actually play this game is in multiplayer mode. There's no single-player campaign for the actual story. Finally, we have 2020 and Resident Evil Resistance. This game was released in conjunction with Resident Evil Nemesis, and I believe was sold as a package deal. So if you bought Nemesis, you had the ability to play Resident Evil Resistance. I have not played it, even though I own the new Nemesis release, as I did not find it an interesting gameplay style for me. And what's the gameplay style? Well, you get to team up with 3 other people online to tackle a maze of rooms in order to escape and save yourself and your friends. So it is a cooperative, zombie trap infested game. Now, what makes this interesting though, one thing that kind of made me want to play is there is a 5th player involved. So there's yourself, 3 other people, and 1 other person on top of that. That last person plays the part of the mastermind. This mastermind is able to set traps, lay enemies, and hazards in your path. I believe they can actually also take control of certain enemies and play as them. So you can place like Mr. X, you can place William Birkin, along with some other, enemies from Resident Evil history and all that to fight and stop the people from escaping. That was actually a lot of side games. There are more with the Resident Evil mobile games, and there are actually sometimes separate releases for other games. We'll talk about those a little bit more. I do want to briefly cover eventually the different releases for Resident Evil 0, especially if there are actual differences between the games. So we'll talk about that briefly probably when we talk about the mobile games. Anyways, guys, thank you very much for hanging out. I hope you have a great day. We'll see you around.